All right, we are at 12 noon. I'm excited to see you all. Hi, everyone. My name is Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm so glad you found your way to our professional development series. And we're going to begin today with a land acknowledgement.
Okay, let me share my screen and sound. Don, can you see what I want you to see? Perfect. All right, here we go.
As the first land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilized the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
Thank you. If you're here, you're probably aware that our professional development series meets every Wednesday at 12 noon over Zoom, and you have the Zoom link. We'll use the same one next time, and we'll keep using it until IT tells us to stop. So we're so glad to see you. We'll get to today's event here in just a second, but I want to announce a lot of other things coming up. First of all, tomorrow, Thursday, April 11th, in the Hale Library Hemisphere Room which is Hale 581, from 1 to 5:30, K-State and the University Press of Kansas are hosting an event on book publishing titled University Press Publishing: Finding a Publisher, Revising Your Dissertation, and Authors Roundtable. So if that's something that's interesting to you, definitely check that out. Next Wednesday, on April 17th, Doris Carroll from the College of Education will have a Need to Know professional development event in our series on microaggressions that we're very excited about. On Tuesday, April 23rd, Lisa Tatanetti, who is this year's Kaufman Chair for University Distinguished Teaching Scholars, which is the highest teaching honor that K-State gives, will be giving her Kaufman Chair lecture called Treaties, Teaching, and First-Gen Land Grant Responsibilities. This will be in person, and my colleagues just dropped some of that information into our chat. And I'm sorry. I guess someone said something and meant to be muted. And then finally, well, not finally, but one of the next things, very important things, is our SOTO Showcase. Will be Monday, May 6th, which is the Monday of finals week, from 1:30 to 4:30, also in Hale Library in room 181. And my colleagues just dropped some of that information into the chat. This is an opportunity to share awesome ideas. The submission deadline is this Friday, April 12th, and we have a Qualtrics to complete if you're thinking about submitting. I want to give a little bit of a little overview of this, and I want you to really think hard about submitting to that. So SOTL stands for Scholarship and Teaching and Learning. So if you do anything that is research-like, so kind of examining the effectiveness of your teaching practices or those kind of things in kind of a research or an action research kind of way, we definitely want you to submit. However, if you just have like kind of an innovative teaching idea that you might have a lesson that you could share with the rest of us, that would also qualify. So when we're talking kind of the research on teaching and learning, the scholarship teaching and learning, we have a very loose definition of what that is. I'm looking to create a wonderful space for us to hear great ideas from people doing great things. So I don't want a lot of censorship and saying, oh, I don't think I'm ready. I don't want to do this. Don't let that imposter phenomenon keep you from getting your good ideas out there to your colleagues. If you have questions, please follow up with me. But again, the Qualtrics survey is going to be due this Friday on April 12th. We will ask whether you're interested in doing an oral presentation, because we'll have some of those. A poster presentation, we'll have some of those. And if you'd be willing to kind of adjust your modality accordingly. So we might have too many posters and need a couple more presentations or something like that. So we might reach out to you if that does occur. But if you have questions, please let me know. I'll also remind you that all of our events are recorded and archived on the TLC webpage. So this event, which afterwards you're going to say, oh my goodness, all of my colleagues need to see this. You can tell them where that is. We'll have this posted up a couple hours after today's event. And today I am very excited because we have Beth Pesnell from the College of Education here, and Dr. Pesnell is going to talk to us about strategies to enhance student engagement and encourage visible thinking. Dr. Pesnell, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and for that great little welcome there. So I'm going to drop in the chat links to my slides and or a PDF of the slides if you so choose, if you enjoy those. And I'm also going to tell you that there will be a couple of times where you may want to have a scratch piece of paper, or if you're like me, you're probably already taking notes in these. So just have that handy as we get started. So as I pull up my screen, I am Beth Pesnell, and I teach here in the College of Education. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Excuse me. I teach in the College of Education, and I teach elementary pre-service teachers in science and math methods. So a little bit of background there for you guys today. So I'm just going to share, this is really just going to be a dipping your toes in the water today because there's so much that can be shared on this, on the ideas within this. So I really tried to pull things that I thought you could take back and implement pretty quickly as we go through this. So my purpose for this is to help you elevate instructional practices so you can increase student engagement and include all of your students, not just maybe a few, to engage your students in multiple types of interaction, and thus foster a little bit more equitable learning. And in the process, deepen students' thinking through routines that will help reveal their thinking to you. So I want you to consider the culture of your classrooms, of your courses. And do you routinely send a message that you value student thinking? So I want this to kind of be the guiding question for you today, thinking about am I sending this message that their thinking is valuable? So that as we go through, maybe you can start to see ways that you can maybe adjust that a little bit. So what is visible thinking? So that was part of my title, right? To encourage visible thinking. So a quick history on visible thinking. So visible thinking actually started as a research initiative to develop these research-based approaches, right, to teaching thinking dispositions. So thinking is more than just a set of skills. It also involves all of these dispositions. They were looking at things like open-mindedness, creativity, curiosity, skepticism, and how our students value evidence. And so it started there, and it has grown tremendously. It was originally developed in Sweden through an Innovating with Intelligence project. And this initiative has been implemented from elementary all the way up through university level courses. So what I'm sharing today is applicable to you no matter the content or level that you teach. It has now become what is called Project Zero, and it is kind of housed through the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And they now have some additional visible thinking initiatives that are really focused on the arts and on cultural kind of aspects of it and cultures of thinking. So you may be, if you are have gone to any museum trips or anything like that, you have probably heard of visible thinking in museums. And so it is definitely something that is out and abroad and not just in a classroom now. So when we're thinking about this idea of making thinking visible, it really has the power to do a lot. in our classrooms and for our students. It can foster deeper learning. It can really cultivate engagement. It will help you to kind of change that role of student and teacher. So maybe a little less sage on the stage and more guide on the side, right? It can enhance your formative assessment practices. And if you're not familiar with that, I mean, that's, feel free, I'll share more about that, but it's really about the way that you are observing, the way that you are assessing and thinking about your instruction based on what you're seeing happen like at that moment, right? So how are you going to inform your future instruction for your students? That's a really brief way to think about that. It's going to improve your learning, right? If you're thinking deeper, we're going to have an improved learning, and your students are going to start to develop these dispositions for thinking that are going to carry them through no matter what they do. So making thinking visible is a stance or a belief. It's a culture in your course. So it's something that you want to really show that you're valuing and nurturing, right? And we develop this type of thinking in social endeavors too. So it's not something that we're asking students to do completely on their own, but it's a very social process. And it utilizes these teaching practices on a routine basis. And so there are 4 main teaching practices that are really involved in this making thinking visible kind of process. And that's questioning, making sure that you're asking those questions that are going to facilitate thinking, listening, the documentation of student thinking, and thinking routines. Now, I could do, or other people could do sessions on each of those just individually, but today we're going to focus on the thinking routines aspect, because in my opinion, those are things that you can take immediately and go use, okay? And when we make thinking visible, we get a window into what they understand, and we also see how they're understanding it. So this gives us evidence of their insights, but it also helps us to understand their misconceptions. And understanding misconceptions helps us to know what we need to do in our instruction, right? To help them to revise those conceptions into more accurate ideas. So the goal of making thinking visible is for us to get inside their heads. We want to see what they're doing. We want to see their thinking. And so when we can understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they might be attending to, we can use that then to further engage them in this process of understanding. And then this whole idea of making their thinking visible becomes this ongoing piece for effective teaching. Okay. So I said that thinking is a social endeavor. So I want to talk really briefly about different types of interactions that can occur in your classroom settings. Okay. So the first we're probably all very familiar with is that individual independent thinking and work time. I like to call it the alone zone, just because that's, I'm an elementary teacher, and so rhyming is great for me, right? So, but the alone zone is where they do this thinking on their own, but we want them to take that independent thinking and bring it forward, because we learn from other people, right? We appreciate new perspectives, and we gain deeper understanding that way. So then we can also interact in partners. And I put pairs and triads here because if you're like me, I'm always lucky to have an odd number of students. And so pairing up doesn't always happen. So we sometimes have triads, but this is exactly what it sounds like. They're working together with another student. They're sharing, they're discussing, they're thinking about things. And then you have small groups, and small groups are typically 3 to 5-ish Okay, people. There's some research out there that says that once you get above 5, you really kind of lose what you're trying to do in that small group. And so the idea here is that they are collaborating with others. They're sharing their thinking and hearing others, and then they come together and synthesize. And then finally, we come together as a collective group, right? The whole class. So I'm just going to pause for a moment, and I want you to think about your classroom structures, and is there an interaction that you find you lean more toward? Is there one that maybe you don't do enough of? So I'm just going to give you a moment to kind of think and reflect on that. You might even jot it down if you want. Okay, so you have that idea of maybe what you really do a lot of and maybe what you don't do as much of. And so as we're going through this today, I want you to look at maybe some opportunities to increase the different types of interactions through the various routines that we're going to look at. Okay, and I feel like I'm talking really fast, but there's so much to share and so little time. So I'm going to do my best. All right, so let's talk about thinking routines and what I mean when I say thinking routines. And of course, I didn't come up with this, but so thinking routines are tools, okay? They're used to help us prompt and promote thinking. It's very simple. So there are, we use a hammer for, putting nails in our wall, right? Or a screwdriver to connect things. So these are tools to help our students think and to help us see their thinking. They're also structures that allow us to scaffold that thinking and in the process reveal what they're doing. And then as you use these over time, right, because they're called routines, right, they become patterns of behavior. And so your students start to adopt that routine and use them in other places. And they start to take that, and as they're doing their own thinking, they utilize those as a tool themselves. So typically the routine consists of a set of questions that's very structured, scaffolded, or this really brief sequence of steps that you use to kind of walk your students through this process. And it helps to create discussion. It fosters these connections within our students. They are collaborative. They are helping each other learn from each other, learn perspectives, learn about their lives, and it thus expands their knowledge. Obviously, it encourages a lot of different interactions with the content. And hang on just a second. Something popped up in the chat, but I'm sure somebody else is watching the chat for us. Okay, so my little clicker just stopped working. There we go. And it promotes.
Beth, I can watch the chat for you as you're going through.
Thank you so much, Don. I
The
appreciate
thing that
that.
popped up was actually a private message from me to you. So
Oh, gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
not a big deal.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. So here's what I love about these. It promotes this risk-free thinking. There's no right or wrong answers. And, sometimes when students come in, they are like, they don't want to answer your questions. They don't want to talk in your class because they're afraid of being wrong. And learning is a risky business, right? Like we have to have this culture in our class that's going to accept when things might be wrong, and when we make mistakes. They've got to be able to have that that safe feeling. And so I love these routines for that, in that like whatever they have down is okay. And I'm not going to come around and say, nope, that's not right. Or somebody else isn't going to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. Okay, so today I hope to spotlight 4 routines. This is my goal. And you might have heard of a few of these. And then in the spotlight, here's my structure. I will share the purpose of the routine. I'm going to share a little bit about maybe some content it can be used with. I'm going to share some examples from my teaching. We'll look at the interaction that was promoted through the structure, why we should use it, and if there are any variations on the spotlight, on the structure. And then I'm going to give you a chance at the end to just kind of think and reflect about how you could use that structure in your course. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Here's where you're going to want to get your pen and paper, and just make a simple T-chart. Okay, so notice and wonder. So the purpose of notice and wonder is to help students articulate their thinking as you start your lesson, as you start a learning sequence, a unit. I use this in science when we are investigating phenomena because it's a great way to get us thinking about those things. It helps to spark curiosity and wonder, and it emphasizes the importance of observation. Okay. So what can the content that we can use this with? Well, anything, images, objects, anything that you want students to use some observation skills to think about. Paintings, photos. You could bring in an artifact, a video clip. You can use data, a text excerpt, like maybe you're looking at a specific primary source or a historical document, and you could bring in an excerpt. A cartoon is great, like concept cartoons, political cartoons, graphics, charts, anything that way that you could utilize the power of observation. So are you ready? Do you have a T-chart made? Okay, so you're going to make a T-chart. On one side, you're going to put notice. On the other side, you're going to put wonder. In elementary, we say, I notice, I wonder. But with my college students, we just put notice, wonder. Okay, I'm going to show you an image, and I would like for you to jot down a couple of things that you notice as you're looking at the image, and maybe some things that you are wondering about. Now in my classroom, I would give you a lot more time than this. So I'm curious, what are some things that you noticed? You can type it in the chat, or you can just unmute and just share out. What are things that you noticed?
So to give kind of the obvious answer, notice that the sun position changes the shade pattern that we see on the ground.
Oh, okay. So we see a different pattern on the ground from the shading. Okay.
This contraption looks kind of like a table, but not a particularly effective table.
Okay. So in my classes, I would also hear things like, because they may not go to where Dawn went, right, with the whole idea about the sun and position yet, right? And so they notice that there are holes, and you can see kind of that imaging in the shadow in the first one, but in the second one, those aren't there, right? There, you just see the lines. So what are some things you're wondering?
I wondered how someone even thought of this. That's one of the things that I wondered.
Okay. What's it used for? Oh, there's stuff coming in the chat. Oh, how would this react to the eclipse? That's a great question, Jack. How is it used? It's a bench that plays with light. Okay, shapes are formed. Okay, so yeah, so this is something that you would use at the beginning, right, to get them curious and questioning. Again, in science, I use this for phenomena, and it gets us kind of engaged in where we're about to go. But if you're about to look at a famous, painting or a famous document, getting them to think about things that they notice, and we talk about this idea of noticings are things that we can directly observe, right? And then wonder. And so now they're really thinking, they're starting to question, and they have a vested interest in it, right? So I'll just go ahead and I'll tell you that this bench is designed, you're right, to capture certain patterns from the sun on the days of solstice. And so one of the days of solstice, the winter solstice, it looks one way, and at summer solstice, it looks another way. And so, yeah, so that's kind of a fun thing. So here is a way that I've used this in my classroom beyond just what I showed there. And one of the lessons that I do, I have a lesson on water distribution, and I use this video about gathering icebergs. And so it technically is from a water bottling company in Norway, but I clip the end of it off so they don't see that. And so they watch this video, and the big question that they ultimately come to is, why are they doing this, right? Why are they gathering icebergs? So I start them off, and I have them create a notice and wonder, and we use notebooks in my class, and I just happened to snap this this week when they were doing it. And so they capture the things that they notice. And then what are they wondering? And one of the keys that you have to always remember is you have to give them time to think. So we watch the video, but then I pause afterwards, and I really give them time to think about what they saw, what they're questioning, etc. After that, my classroom is set up so that they sit in small table groups. So the groups then together shared, and they talked about their notices and their wonders. And this is, I love to hear these discussions, because this is when they're like, oh my gosh, I totally didn't even see that. Or, oh yeah, I forgot about that, right? And so they're catching on, and then their questions pose other questions, which is fantastic. And then we come together as a group, and sometimes I write this on chart paper, or I do it in a PowerPoint, but I always record the whole group's thoughts, right? And so this is just capturing from one of our classes in my notebook that I use to model. But the reason that we do this is because now we have honored all voices in the classroom, right? They got to individually think about it, then they got to share together, and then their group shared out those big ideas and takeaways. And so you'll see that ultimately the question I wanted them to get to is, why are they collecting this? Because what we're doing is we eventually go on to learn about the amount of fresh water, how it's distributed, accessibility of fresh water, etc. And the whole time they're trying to figure that question out. Okay. So with the notice and wonder, you actually have all of the different types of interaction. They start individually with their notices and wonders. Then, and I've used this connecting line kind of to depend on how your classroom is set up. Maybe you want them to share in partners instead of like a smaller group. Or for me, they were already in table groups, so we use the small group. And then it comes into the whole group. Okay. So why would we want to use something like this? Any ideas?
Provoke curiosity.
Promotes curiosity.
Exchange of ideas.
Yes, it's a great way to exchange ideas, right? And that's one of the great things about it, is because it begins your learning cycle with the students' thoughts and ideas. Yes, the students' reflection, and you learn their perspective, right? You can help students start to see your questions or the problems that you're going to be investigating in a bigger picture. it's a safe environment for them to share their thoughts. So they had time to think about their own thinking first, and then as a smaller group, and then in the whole group, and we got to see all of that grow, right? And there was no right or wrong answer as we went through it. It increased participation for all students, right? So everybody was part of this, and it helps them to engage in open-ended thinking. So there are some variations of notice and wonder. It's one of the probably most common ones is called see, think, wonder. So this one, it would be like, I notice, right? So what do I see? What do I think is happening? And what do I wonder, right? So this would have been, so Don's example, right, where he saw different shadows. Well, I see different shadows, and I think it's because of like something that has to do with the sun's position. And I wonder, like what, where this is or whatever that way. Another one is what I call an owl chart. So where they capture observations, they capture wonderings, and then after they've done some learning, they go back and attach their learnings to these ideas. So that's an owl. And then you have think, puzzle, explore, which is very similar. So what am I thinking about this idea? What may be puzzling? What questions are here? And then let's go explore it. Okay, so you've got some nice variations there on this idea of a notice and wonder. The notice and wonder doesn't take long at all. You don't always have to go to the whole group if you don't want to. It could stop at the small group. It could just be a quick share out. Every group give me one notice. Every group give me one wonder. That can be adapted in your class, but it really doesn't take quite as long, as especially once students are used to it. So I'm going to stop for a moment and pause and let you think and reflect on how you might use this in your class.
So Beth, I wasn't sure if we were still in the thinking phase or if you want responses yet.
So I was just about to say,
Sure.
if anybody has an idea that you would like to share, we would love to hear it.
So I was just going to say, I think what you're kind of talking about is this is something we should always use in class, right? So it's something that should just be part of the mode of interaction with our students, that we should be inspiring to always think about and always wonder about the material. It makes the whole experience more intrinsically motivating for them. It makes it more exciting for us. So I'm kind of thinking, how would I not use this in my class? I think you've made a great case that we need to do this all the time in all the ways.
I love it. I love it. Anybody else have like a particular lesson or activity that you were thinking about that you could use this with, or how you might try it?
I could see using it in our horticulture classes when we're like showing samples of plants with symptoms of maybe disease. Is it a pest? Is it environmental damage? And students could, they could brainstorm their own ideas first and then learn from each other. I think that would be kind of a safe approach.
Yeah, that is a very good one. I love that. Jack shared in the chat, I could bring in a few of my plants and ask them what makes plant A different from plant B. I love that. So you're making observations of both of them and then what makes them different. Very cool. Okay, so hopefully you've got some ideas on how to take this back and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. We could probably spend all day sharing and just talking about this one. But the next one I want to look at is called I used to think, but now I think. Has anyone ever used the sentence stem or heard it maybe used? Possibly, maybe a couple of heads shaking. Okay. So the purpose of this thinking routine is to reflect on how and why our thinking changes. And did you know our thinking does change, right? Like we're probably aware of that, but our students don't always see that. And so it helps us then to develop reasoning abilities. It helps us to consolidate new learning. And we start to recognize cause-effect relationships, especially within what we're learning. And so the great thing about this is that, and all of these really, is that it can be applied to so many different subject areas, especially when there's the opportunity for their initial thinking, their opinions or beliefs or whatever to change as a result of what you've been studying. Okay. So I want to share, I'm going to share an example from my online course first, and then I'll share an example of how I've used it in my in-person. So in my online course in our Master of Arts in Teaching, they are looking at teaching elementary math and science. And we spend some time at the beginning investigating the standards. We look at how and why they were developed. And there's always a lot of mixed thinking. That's probably going to be the best way to say it, about Common Core math standards. And so at the end of their module for that week, this is their discussion post. And so they use the sentence stem. I used to think blank, but now I think blank. And I asked them to finish the sentence stem, and then they have to elaborate on it. And they use evidence from the module to support their new thinking. Okay. And so here are a couple of examples. And I know it's really tiny, but it was hard to get these in. So this first person, so what you'll see is the top one is the initial post and the bottom one is one of the replies. So I used to think Common Core was another way for our government to put pressure on teachers and students, but now I know that the states have a choice in the adoption of Common Core and they have increased students' understanding. So I immediately now can see what this student is walking away with from this module learning, and it took one sentence, right? So, and I know like this is a big thing I wanted them to walk away with too. And so then they've gone on and they have given me evidence. They've shared some things that they were reading that they learned. Here are some things that I've figured out. And then the great thing is the discussion replies, right? The responses that come in this post are amazing. And so like this person said, I was also skeptical of, how useful this would be from the government and that they were pushed on the states. And I always thought that this idea of universal standards was good, but I didn't expect an adequate execution of the idea. I was surprised by how much thought had been put into the standards and how adaptable they are. So now what I get in the responses is I also start to see other students thinking and how it shifted, right? So not only did I see that in their initial response, but now I'm also seeing them share with other students how their thinking changed and where it is now. And then one more. So they went a little different route and they looked at the fact that they thought that the standards defined what they should teach and how they should teach it. And now they realize that they define what a student should know by the end of the year, right? So they're bringing in kind of this misconception and they've clarified that. I love this example because she didn't stop here. She said, I also now think, right, that it's the teacher's responsibility to determine the most effective way to teach their students. And so you see this like, okay, here's what I have changed, but here's another way that it's changed, right? So this sentence stem is kind of one of those deceptively simple structures that you can use, right, to really reveal your students' thinking. I try in my course to have discussion posts that don't feel like another paper that they've had to write. And that was something I hated in my graduate work. I felt like sometimes our discussion posts became like this new paper, another paper I had to write, and then I had to read all these others. So I really want them to be discussions, and stems like this really allow them to do that. And then what we did, I took it from the small discussion board groups and brought it to the whole group when we met and had conversations that way. So then in my in-person class, I use this as well in a couple of different ways. Typically it's after we have read something, talked about something, they've, investigated it further. And so I have a template that they use. And so this student was sharing how she used to think the 5E model was long and daunting, but now she really sees it as doable and helpful, and goes on to explain that. This student obviously put a lot, you can see, like, shared a lot and put a lot of thought into hers. And she's looking at assessments. I used to think there was only one way to use assessments, but now I think there are multiple ways to assess. So immediately I can see, right, here's what they came into this with, and now here's where they are. And by elaborating on it, they then share even more of their thinking. For me, like this, I would much rather see this as something that I'm going to read as a homework assignment rather than trying to see this massive product where I'm like, well, did they really get out of this what I'm thinking? Did they do this? Etc. This is going to be hard for them to throw into Chat GPT and give you a response, right? So it's quite authentic, and it really reveals what they're thinking about and how. So as I mentioned, it starts individually, right? So when we think about the interactions, and then in the discussion boards, it becomes that partner or small group. And then you bring it back to the whole group. And some things that could come out are maybe instead of everybody sharing out from the whole group, I, as a teacher, after reading through these things, can come in and say, here are some of the big themes that I saw in your thinking, right? And we could talk about those. So there's a lot of ways that you can bring in the multiple types of interaction with this sentence stem. Why should we use it? Reflection. We look at how our thinking changes. So we also are developing their metacognitive skills. So now they start to identify and think about their thinking, okay? And it helps them confront their own misconceptions and shift their thinking in a really safe manner, okay? Again, there's no right or wrong answer, right? And then here's the cool thing. Another great way to use this in your classes is as an exit ticket. So at the end of your class, I used to think, now I think. And then you've got an immediate, like, formative assessment to instruct your next steps. Did they take away from it what I want? Did their thinking change? Are we still sitting in this spot? And it's just a really great kind of quick snapshot for you to check in with what they're doing. Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to let you think about, I used to think, now I think, and how you might could use this.
I can use it when I show my students videos on urban vacancy and historic redlining in cities, and how students think about systematic racism.
Mm-hmm. Great example. Great example. For an in-person class, do I use a discussion board, or do they talk about their ideas in class? Good question. So Carrie, I've done it several different ways. What you saw in my in-person class, that was a homework assignment that they did. And then we started our next class with them in their small groups, sharing about like their thinking, and they share their sentence stem. Basically, they don't always have to share the elaboration, and then they talk a little bit about that. And typically I've read through them if they, if they were submitted enough in advance, and can bring out those highlights too. So, but you can also do it right there in class. You could do it again as an exit ticket and then start your next class that way, or in a discussion board. Yeah, so there's that's the great thing about it. It's completely flexible and it can be used to fit your needs. Okay, I'm gonna go on because I still have a couple more to talk about. So the next one is called Give One, Get One. Anybody familiar with this one? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So Give One, Get One is designed to encourage active and close listening to others. And it helps us to contribute to others' ideas. We then tune into a variety of perspectives, okay? We can use this in a wide variety of content. Again, all of these span, they're kind of content agnostic, right? They are useful when you might have multiple ideas or perspectives that are likely to arise. So like if you're generating ideas for a design project, if you're reviewing content for a test or something that way, if you're trying to describe a character in a book, or any of the deep messages or meanings in a book, uncovering student knowledge about a topic, if you just want to see what do they know already. So lots of ways that they can use it. So here's a classroom example. So this is what they do first for me is the Give One. Typically they complete it outside of class. Okay, so it could be from a reading, it could be from their like takeaways from our a last class, anything that way. It could be from other media that they've looked at, and I typically give them a certain number. Like I want you to have like at least 4 takeaways or 5 takeaways, right? So I give them kind of that set number. And then when we come to class, we use this, all right? And so in my setting, I actually combined this with a jigsaw. So I had 4 different groups reading different articles about the standards and things like that. And they came back. And then in class, what we do is then we do a partnering. Okay, we do a hand up, stand up, pair up, and and then that one they walk around and they have their hand up and they give each other a high five and they find a partner. And so the idea here is that partner A shares something from their Give One column, and so partner B then listens and records that in their Get One. So they are getting ideas from others, and then they switch. Okay, and so you can kind of see this is an example of how they're partnering. And then we come back together at the end and we share out some of these ideas. What did they hear? What did they notice? That even though they read this article, this was a theme, right? And so you get to start to dig a little bit deeper and synthesize that learning. Again, you can get all of the types of interaction here. They start individually. You can have them do, like I mentioned, the stand up, hand up, pair up. If you would rather, they could do it in a small table group and do a round robin. So like everybody shares one of their Give Ones, and then they all get like that same information. So it can be utilized in different ways. And then obviously, right, like that whole group becomes that debrief, that sharing of the key ideas. You could have the small groups like record their big ideas that they got from the Give One, Get One on chart paper and then do a gallery walk. So there's a lot of ways that you could take this and move forward with it. So why do we want to use this? Well, it's collaborative And then you've got physical movement, right? Which my students love. They're in my class for an hour and a half. And so physical movement is important to them. You get new perspectives, divergent thinking, and elaboration on your topics. So you can use this in a variety of ways. Article annotation is another way that I have seen it, where like I'm the first peer that annotates my article, and then I share it with another peer and they come in and they annotate. We use the give one, get one that way. It would be a cool way to do peer reviews. And I use it a lot with Jigsaw readings or teaching. So when I want to kind of bring in several different sources, but I don't want them to all have to read all of it. So it's a really nice way to do that. Okay, I'm going to pause, give you a moment, think about this, but we still have one more. So it'll be a quick pause. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go on. Hopefully you have some ideas, maybe, for using this. Okay, the last one that we're going to look at is called a placemat consensus. And so think about a placemat that you use, right, on your tables, right, under your dishes. And that's kind of what we're going to look at. So the purpose for this is to share individual perspectives and thinking before they collaborate. And then it eventually guides them to either this common understanding, agreement, or a synthesized response. And again, wide variety of subject areas, specifically again, when you want those initial thoughts, opinions, or beliefs, right, to come out, or you want them to maybe start to change them or agree on some things that way. Okay, this is what it kind of looks like. So think chart paper. Okay, I'm an elementary teacher again, right? But I've also used this in slides. So you don't have to use chart paper. You can do it on a slide. They could do it on, whatever you have available that way, but they split it into sections. It's typically easier to split into 2 or 4, obviously, right? And so I have them kind of do this. And they start in the alone zone. Everybody writes at the same time in their section, and they capture their thinking, their reflections in their portion. Then they do a group share out and everybody gets to share their thinking. And while Don is sharing his thinking, I'm looking at mine and I go, oh, I have that too. And I put a little check mark or a star or something beside it to see those connections in our thinking. Because then at the end, we're going to come together and have this consensus discussion to think about the ideas that were collectively important to our group. And those go in the middle. So here's what that looks like. So here's one of my groups working individually. You can see each of them have their own section in the paper and they're all writing and working, okay? And you can even see some of their computers up because they were working off of some things that they had done before class, and they're synthesizing and bringing those ideas here. Then here they are with their groups. They're talking about it. They're looking at the collective ideas and they record it in the middle. Okay. And then what I do is I go around kind of in a whippet fashion, so to speak, and each group shares out from their middle section with me to create our whole group kind of consensus thinking. So this one was on a specific chapter that they read in our text. And so these are the key ideas that we felt like collectively as a class, we needed to take out of this chapter. Okay. Again, you see all of those interactions involved in this, this thinking routine. Okay, so it's flexible. You can put it in multiple sections of your lesson sequence at the beginning to see what they've learned, at the end, or what they know, at the end, what they learned, in the middle to come to consensus about something. Oh, see, look, I'm ahead of myself. And then the great thing is it synthesizes all of those thinking using all of the interactions. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to reflect on this one, and then I've got some tips for you, and then I think I've made it. Woohoo! Outside of the classroom, this would be great for staff retreat or training. Yes, I love it. And I actually have used a lot of these in like professional development sessions that I do, things like that. This is a really great one. You're right. To use and to see how everybody's thinking about it, and then collectively what gets started. A great start to group projects. Yes, this would be a great way to, like, if you're thinking about a design project, right? Or starting a research, right? So what are my ideas? What are your ideas? And then we come together and collectively, what did we think were important? And these then should be in our project. That's a great one. Okay, so some tips. I know I've like given you like this speed, like flyby on these 4 routines, but you want to really get to know the routine. So what I mean by that is don't try to implement all 4 of these like at the same time. Pick one of them and really get to know it and how it works in your class. Use it with lots of different circumstances or materials, and have that regular repeated use, right? That's what makes it a routine. So my students know now when I say, let's make a Notice and Wonder chart, they know immediately what that is. Thanks, Andy. But you also have to allow ample time for thinking. You don't want to rush the process. You don't want to do what I did today and rush your thinking, right? Like you have to, that's really hard sometimes as a teacher, but you've got to stop and give them that time to do it. And then you want to kind of use it as much like purely as you can at the beginning to get to know it, and then you can start to adapt it. And that's when it gets really fun. But just enjoy this process, right? This is how you're going to get to see your students really engaging with your content, and you are going to just be kind of standing back, guiding and facilitating this amazing discussion. So it really shifts that role, like we talked about earlier, from you being the everything to now it's more about the students thinking all in the forefront. You're just helping to facilitate that discussion. So I just want to let you know, we're going to skip that. I've added the references and some of the key kind of resources for this in the last slide. But all of these things that I shared, well, most of them, the placemat consensus is one that I've brought in, and it's not necessarily one that they've talked about in the book, but I've seen it done in their 2 books, Making Thinking Visible and The Power of Making Thinking Visible. Okay. I encourage you to take a look at that. If nothing else, this right here, this toolbox, this could be your favorite place to go, because it literally tells you if this is what you want to do, here's some routines for you to do it. And it walks you through the routines and everything right there. So whew, I know it was a lot. Thank you guys for hanging in as I went so fast. And look, I even have 2 minutes left. So if anybody has questions or other thoughts, we have a couple minutes.
So ideally, everyone will help me thank Dr. Pesnell for sharing wonderful thoughts about some active learning techniques to make thinking more visible in our classes. I think there's some really exciting and empowering things we can do for our students from the stuff that you did. And one of the things that I love about it, it was both, kind of theoretically made sense, but it was also super practical. So I really like that kind of juxtaposition of those 2 goals. So thank you so much for that. We have a post-event survey in the chat that I'll ask you to kind of complete based on your experiences today. I'll remind you that we meet every Wednesday at noon to do our professional development series. Next week, Dr. Doris Carroll from the College of Education will talk about microaggressions. Sure hope you're here for that. I'll remind you our Soto Showcase deadline is this coming Friday, and we have a Qualtrics survey to complete, and we want to hear your wonderful ideas. We want to hear all the great things that you're doing in your teaching, research related to teaching and learning as well. And if you have any questions about that, please reach out, and I'll be happy to give you some guidance. I also forgot to mention, my colleagues put that in there, you can get a TLC Professional Development Certificate and or become a fellow if you're a faculty member at the end of this semester, and they put the information into the chat that you can click on that too. Those deadlines are coming up here in May, so check those out and let us know if you have questions. If anyone has questions, let's stick around for another minute. But otherwise, thank you so much for making time for us today. If you're watching asynchronously, thank you so much for making time for us whenever you're watching. And we'll see you next Wednesday at our PD event. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. And again, thank you, Dr. Pesnell.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.